All right, good morning, everybody. I learned two things yesterday. One, there's a lot of party animals in this group. It's always fun to see, go to a conference and everybody's straight jacket most of the day and then see people loosen up at night, which is awesome. Welcome to the final, and I would argue one of the most important days out of the time we've spent here. And hello to the good folks on Zoom. We have a screen behind me that shows who's online, which is great. So great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Today is focused on product discussion and roadmap planning. This is really key, and this day requires your participation. I'll tell you why. This, in some way, maybe some of you don't fully recognize this, but this is the day where you get to give direction to the work we're going to do for the next 13 weeks, Kim? Yes, for the next 13 weeks. So it's very important that we engage and you proactively get out your agendas, your wish list. It would be great to hear that so that we can come up with a plan for the next 13 weeks. Before we begin, just a couple of quick things to go over. This feels like a whole new conference. We have new badges and lots of swag. So please make sure you pick yours from the registration desk. Today is also the day where we give an award to those who have been very active in our community. We've got some limited edition swag that's not up on the registration desk. We might as well give an award for the most, how do I put it? The person who partied hard the most last night at the convening. So we'll get it started. We have I'll pass it to Kim, and then after Kim we'll have Paul Makin, and then after that I'm sure we'll get some direction on how we can get your feedback and planning. So welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Simeon. And again, I'm Kim Walters. I think I know most of you because I've been around for a long time. But where's the clicker? Here. I just wanted to kind of reflect back. Okay. Just take a look back at kind of where we came from. I know some of you guys are new to Mojo Loop and new to this. So kind of a history looking back of where we've been is always kind of fun. And then just touch on kind of, why we have open source, what the importance of this is. And then we'll go into kind of roadmap and planning and really kind of why it's really critical to get your input today. So why open source? Mojo Loop is an open source project. And, obviously our purpose here is financial inclusion. But really with the open source and the building of the Mojo Loop Foundation is we want to encourage innovation and collaboration. And that's what open source allows us to do, right? It allows us to take the software. It's not deep buried in a corner somewhere. It's not restrictive with licensings or fees, but it has the great benefits of open source and the intellectual property of so many people. So there's a lot of myths around open source, but it actually is very secure, very reliable, and very high quality. It's because they have so many eyes on it. So again, why open source might seem a little bit scary, we are actually having a webinar in a couple of months just on open source. And if you're new to open source, how to get more familiar with it. And also if you're a commercial entity, how to actually make money off of open source. There's many case studies around that as well. But making you feel comfortable with using it, adopting it, and contributing it back. So we will have some kind of webinar later coming out. You'll see that from the foundation on open source. And no matter if you're a participant or a receiver, how to benefit and how to leverage it appropriately. Next is the timeline. So I just had to redo this because I haven't touched this in a long time once we went remote. I'm not really going to too deeply on it, but we started way back when in 2016. I see Matt in the room because I know he was back in the original kickoff. Sam is somewhere. He was originally there. So there's a few of us that were back in the days when we met in Seattle. And we started basically with the Gates Foundation sponsoring this project. And we had 4 developer teams to bring into those projects. That was Joala, Modusbox, a software group, and Ripple, who produced the Interledger. And our role at Crosslake was to actually bring these groups together and figure out where they play in this new thing, this concept that Miller had and Matt had in their head about how we build this, basically this payment system. So we spent about 2 years in Seattle, and you notice we talk about PI and convening, and PI means program increment. It's actually a safe terminology word, and it was the way we tried to organize ourselves. So program increment is the time we came together every 13 weeks, about 4 times a quarter, to basically organize ourselves and figure out what we were going to do from a sprint and agile planning the next time in development. So we met basically for 2 years in Seattle, kind of building this thing and figuring out how we actually get it out there. And then we finally went and kind of launched the Mojo Loop product. We actually took it and actually started bringing in new community members, pilot members. We actually branded it as Mojo Loop. So that was cool, coming from the level 1 principles to branding. And then we started actually taking this to Africa, right? Our first kickoff meeting was in Johannesburg, and that was somewhere in 2018 or 19. And we kept going and iterating on this. So that's why you hear these things like program increment and phases. So you can see kind of how far we've come. And it's great, even though during COVID, while we were remote, we were still behind the scenes, cranking out development, cranking out code. So none of that work actually stopped. And again, it's been such a pleasure to be here in person with folks and so many community members as well. As far as our schedule, this is our PI program increment schedule upcoming. I'm pleased to announce that we're going to continue doing these sessions live. We'll most likely, instead of doing 4 live a year, we'll do 2 live a year. That gives a great opportunity for folks that can't travel or have limited budget to travel to still participate, but to participate all the time as well. So the next session will be in July, and that will be most likely remote. And then we actually will be meeting on PI 20, which will be part of phase 6 in Zanzibar. For those that you've been around, we were supposed to be in Zanzibar pre-COVID, and we're just actually finally utilizing our deposit there. So if you want to start putting the slots, they're certainly on your calendar. We would appreciate that, and we'll certainly publish this as well. In regards to what's next for today, what we're going to do is I'm going to turn over the mic to Paul. He's going to basically run through kind of the roadmap. He's been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, gathering roadmap input to what other features we need in Mojo Loop, where are our gaps, where are our opportunities. And of course, we heard a lot of those the last couple of days. He'll go through all those different roadmap items in detail so you guys get an answer for them. Please, I encourage questions, because again, this is where we're going to scope our roadmap into development items. And then once we'll do that, once we're done going through that list and everybody's satisfied, we're actually going to vote as a community. You guys online, we'll give you an online voting tool. You guys in person, before you get your lunch tickets, you will have to vote for 3 of these items. And then what we'll do over the break, we'll consolidate the top 3 or 4, and then we'll do breakouts. We'll come back, and maybe up here, we'll have one breakout session. In the end of the room, we'll have another one, and then we'll have another breakout or rest session outside. And we'll have 90 minutes there in a smaller groups to really give your input about what you want to build for this next phase of Mojo Loop. I need business requirements and technical requirements. So this is not limited to, in fact, we want it not to be engineering related. We really want it to be business requirements. So bring your scenarios, bring your challenges, and please give input to these business opportunities. So once you've done these discussions, we'll have another short break, and then we'll come out and do report outs. In these report outs, we use this mural board, which is another kind of online technique you might have seen on the remote sessions. And it's a great way to show, okay, after all of these sessions, here's what we're going to do for the next 13 weeks. So while you guys might not see us for the next 13 weeks, we're busy as hamsters delivering all this code and great stuff we talked about during the sessions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul to go through the roadmap items. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Kim. I'll start sharing my screen, if I may.
Hang on, Paul.
Hello.
Just 1 second. Okay. All right, then share your screen. Cool.
Yeah, just coming. There we go. Can you see it?
Hang on, slow down. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay. There you go. That's really cool. I don't know how you do that, but that's awesome. Cool. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, before we start, can I ask how many people are in the room? Because I have no idea if there's 3 or 300.
Gonna turn the camera so they Paul can see.
Okay, a reasonable number have turned up today. Hi, everyone. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna briefly go through some product council stuff. Not a lot I really want to say there. Then get straight on with the road mapping piece. Okay, so an update on where we are now, and then we're going to talk about the roadmap, the focus areas, and then the main purpose of this session is discussions around that. So let's just get straight on with this. So this is the schedule we have for today, or at least it was the latest version that I saw. We've got until we've got about an hour and a half to go through the various road mapping items and discuss them. And then we're going to move into voting, and then you guys are all going to go off for lunch while I have a mid-morning break. And then we'll go into the work streams for the planning session. I'm not quite sure how many work stream groups we've had, depending on how many people there are. I'm thinking maybe 3, maybe 4. We'll just see how we get on. There's no point in spreading ourselves too thinly. We want to get a reasonable coverage of opinion across the community today. So where are we? I just wanted to do a bit of a reality check based on what Kim has just been saying. I mean, I started working with Motorsbox and Moduloop somewhere around 2 years ago, something like that. And in that time, I've seen it change significantly. When I first started working with it, it was without wanting to upset anyone, it was rather bare bones. You could get Moduloop up and running, but the bits around the edges were somewhat basic. But over that 2 years, I've seen the efforts of the community, and I think fired by the deployments that we have, so that we're at a point now where it's pretty much FSP ready. By which I mean somebody can pick it up and deploy it, run it, and actually run a service off it. It's still not exactly plug and play. There are some rough edges and bits we'd all like to extend or refine. I mean, I heard it said to me once that you build something once and you realize all your mistakes, so you build it again, and then the second time round you're more or less there, and third time it's perfect. But I don't want to spend I don't want us to spend significant effort redoing what we've already done, please. But this is why we're here today. Let's define the work that we need to do. Let's put some polish on, and let's fix some of those core things that we all want to fix. So the overall approach, well, my focus is principally on the business requirements, what functions are missing, what would make an operator's life easier. Can we facilitate an operator's compliance requirement with the regulators? This is very much, though, community influenced. In particular, I want to be influenced by those directly involved in deployments, and that's not just the hub operators. I mean, we had a great deal yesterday from DitsaWorks, and it was really helpful. But also those who are involved in putting together the deployments, the tech ops teams, the infrastructure teams, the product teams. So this is all about deployment. What do potential stakeholders need to move towards deployment? This isn't the only focus, but an important focus for me is when somebody sends out that RFI for what can you do in order to facilitate my switch deployment. How many of these boxes do you tick? I want us to be able to tick as many as possible of them so that we get to the RFP stage in deployments. There's little point in just focusing on what we think needs to be fixed. We do actually have to focus on what those potential users, those potential operators need. We need to hit those tick boxes. I know it's a kind of soul-destroying view of the world, but we do have to get past that initial hurdle if we're going to get more deployments. Yeah, I don't think we need to go through this. Well, what we're trying to do at the moment is the first 2 points here. We developed a high-level roadmap. We know what needs to be done, but I'm going to discuss further today. And this is the purpose of this session, to refine that roadmap and see what we've missed out. We have a mechanism today with you all in one place to allow us to effectively build a backlog to some degree. I know we won't get it finished today, but at least we'll take those first steps, and I and others will be able to take the outputs of today and hopefully start to build that backlog completely. And then we will, over the coming weeks, months, the next PI, start to actually develop them. Yeah, okay. There's nothing I really want to cover there. It's just repeating the same thing. Okay, so here are the candidate use cases. These have been built up from, let's be frank, my own opinion, but also discussing it with other people in this group and elsewhere. So we're talking about foreign exchange support, various enhancements needed around ISO 222, fraud tool integration, merchant payments, enhanced MSISDN routing, new operator portals, level 1 compliant mandates, if such a thing exists, book payments, AISP, and I'll explain more about that later, new settlement models, some extensions around payment manager, and the whole modular loop in a box or mini loop concept. I'm going to explain these a little further, and at the end I'll also be asking people to highlight anything that they feel has been missed and to argue for their inclusion. Now I'm going to talk about each one, but I don't particularly want it to be just me talking. I want people in the room to perhaps explain what they think about it, and let's discuss it. Let's thrash it out a little more before we get into any form of voting. This isn't me evangelizing to you. This is you telling me why you think this is important or not important or whatever it may be. So please don't sit there and let me just talk at you. And Steve, I'm looking at you. The only camera that is on in the room is focused entirely on Steve. Okay, foreign exchange support. So briefly, this is something that's been coming up for quite some time. This is about making the merge loop offering in this space more comprehensive, more allowing greater coverage for all of those national scale deployments. We want to offer multi-currency operation and exchange. Now, at the moment, we know very well that multi-currency is something that is supported directly within Moduloop, but those currencies operate behind effectively Chinese walls, in that they can operate in parallel on the same hub, but there's no way that they can interact, which is what you'd expect. But the next generation of that, the natural evolution of that, is to actually allow them to interact via a foreign exchange mechanism. So foreign exchange service providers plugged into the Moduloop hub, and therefore bringing Forex into business as usual. So we can essentially bring international bank type service to the customers of connected DFSPs. I'm now seeing the real disadvantage of trying to do this remotely, because I'm not getting any feeling or enthusiasm from the room. And I'm going to ask somebody in the room to come up and explain to me why they think foreign exchange is not something that we should do or something that we should do. Is there anyone in the room who's willing to do that? Because this is going to be a very short session if it's just me proselytizing to you in the room.
May I say something, Paul? It's Michael Richards.
Please do, yes.
Okay. So as you know, we've done quite a lot of consultative and design thinking around this. And the particular use cases that we think we need to be able to cater for are, first of all, the ability to provide payment versus payment currency exchange on a per transfer basis. So this is very different, I think, from the way in which foreign exchange is normally provided in payment systems. So the idea is that if you're going to make a single transfer, which involves currency conversion, then you should be able to do that at a level of efficiency which enables that to work in terms of cost and in terms of processing time. We also want to be able to support what we might call bulk currency purchase. So we want to allow DFSPs to purchase an amount of a foreign currency and keep it so that they can actually make transfers in that currency. The other point that I think makes it important for the near future of module loop systems is the CBDC question. Now, when we look at CBDC, it looks to me just like another currency.
Yep.
And it's very probable, seems to me, that in all countries which implement a CBDC, there will be a transitional period where some customers will be transacting using CBDC if they allow retail CBDC, and some customers will be transacting in fiat currency. So the ability to transfer seamlessly, convert seamlessly between those two kinds of customers and to enable them to interoperate with each other is going, we think, well, I think, to be a very important feature of a high functioning instant payment system.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Can I ask you a few questions around that?
Sorry, go on, man.
The payment versus payment piece. I mean, that's where this sector is going in any case, isn't it? And we just need to catch up with that.
I think that's right.
Yeah. So
yep.
that to me is, we have to do this if we are to be seen as a contender in this space.
Well, it's not just that, I think, but I mean, as you know, one of our prime purposes is to reduce operating costs for all the participants.
And
part of that is going to be not asking them to have large holdings in other currencies in order to be able to support effectively as a kind of liquidity cover to support transfers which are going to be converted into that currency.
That's precisely, you put it very succinctly. Thank you, Michael. That's entirely the point, but it does mean that I was just making the general point that a lot of the competitors are moving directly to payment versus payment for this kind of transaction, tying it end to end.
We call them partners.
You may. The bulk forex purchase piece, I mean, you can do that anyway, can't you? It's not really something new, is it? There's no reason why you can't do that now.
It's okay. Yes, it's not new in that sense, but again, being able to bring it into the ambit of the instant payment system, or the module loop system, is something which I think would be a new thing.
Yeah. With regard to CBDCs, before you give up that microphone, I mean, CBDCs, I agree with you. It's just another currency, as far as we're concerned, because we never actually, with a conventional currency, we never actually move the US dollars, the chart or whatever. We're just giving a notification. So to switch a CBDC through Mojo Loop is the same process, but arguably the settlement process is somewhat simpler. So I agree with you. We have to support this. We have to support CBDCs because they are coming. Who knows how successful they are? There will always be a need to interoperate. I think there's very few people who are saying this, that within our lifetime, they will drive out fiat currency or conventional fiat currency. So it is simply a Forex operation, isn't it, between the two?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, we are in agreement. Can I ask
Without
if there's
some of the
anyone in?
I was going to say, hopefully, without some of the uncertainties that surround currency conversion at the moment.
Well, yes, I mean, hopefully it would be at 1-to-1. And though I can foresee some people experimenting with variations on that value, that exchange rate, according to usability. Is there anyone else in the room who wants to comment on this?
Yes. Hey, Paul. Nhi here.
Hi, Nhi.
Not exactly on what you are talking right now, but on the multi-currency operation. For WinePay, one of the use cases that we have on the roadmap is the cross-border. And we would like to vote for this to be yes on the roadmap. And I think when you are going to be talking about the prioritization, then we can perhaps look at things that we voted yes, and then perhaps go through the prioritization again. But if you're asking for yes or no, we vote to yes.
Sorry, can you repeat that last bit, Nhi? My connection went bad for a second.
Right. So we were saying that we would like to vote yes for this to be worked on the roadmap, as one of the use cases on the roadmap for WinePay is the multi-currency cross-border remittance. But when you are ready to then prioritize on things that we say yes, then we can review that again to see where this fits in.
Okay, well, you'll have the opportunity to vote later on today. So,
thank you, Paul.
So I think is there anyone else who wants to comment on this before we move on?
Just a brief follow-up comment that
yeah,
we should not be jumping to conclusions on how CBDCs are treated as part of foreign exchange.
No.
First of all, it's not foreign exchange. It's actually, by its definition, 1-to-1, but it's central bank money. The difference is that it's central bank money, not commercial money. That's not an FX conversion. And if somebody were to do a retail transaction, it self-settles when you're using CBDC. So that's the part we need to focus. My point, though, is to say that the foreign exchange support, absolutely essential. I agree with that. And I will be voting as well for that. But that as we have a center of expertise forming for CBDC and wholesale settlement, we should defer concluding how we think about that now and actually engage with that center of expertise as it forms. It's being run by the Mojo Loop Foundation, and its purpose is to output what these consequences are. We can then iterate with those, with full clarity. So I just want to be sure we don't jump ahead to the solution, but without actually engaging through that work first. But thank you.
Well, there's nothing that you said that I disagree with. Yes, I mean, it's a terminology matter. Referring it to Forex is a shorthand, referring to it as Forex is a shorthand, which may be a little sloppy, I agree, because it's not foreign exchange, but it operates in a similar mechanism. But in general, I don't disagree.
Paul, I think there's a comment in the Q&A from Michael Wagner. Michael, you should be able to unmute and speak.
Yeah, hi. Good morning, Paul, and everyone else. I just wanted to find out about cryptocurrency support from Mojo Loop, because I didn't see that included in the potential roadmap. So I'm just wondering about that. And Lewis asked the question, am I talking about settlement or am I talking about CBDC kind of support? And I think at this point, probably contemplating a little bit of both, but mostly on the settlement side, because I know that people like to try and use that sort of thing for settlements these days. So, I would have thought that we'd want to think about using or engaging with crypto at some point. So I just was wondering about that. Yeah. Also, just by the way, to the point about CBDCs and so on, you know, unless I'm misunderstanding stuff completely, I made a further comment, and that is that there are some currencies around the world that are actually favoring crypto over and above home currency these days. So, you know, just in terms of people moving cash or moving money between people, you know, we might want to think about that too, because crypto is probably safer in some instances than home currencies.
Yeah, it's at times of instability, people will move to a more reliable, secure resource. Of course,
Sure.
It's in many cases it's taking the place of gold, for example.
For sure.
Which argues that it's a commodity rather than a currency as a store of value. But yeah, I certainly agree with you that we need to be considering it, Michael.
Cool.
So,
thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, moving on. Next item is ISO 222. We currently have a pilot rather than a deployment in Rwanda, but it's an initial implementation and it needs updating to reflect developments in what's happening in the relationship between Mojaloop and the ISO 222 people. Also, there are issues there around support for alias-based routing, etc., which does not fit into that particular implementation of ISO 222.
Paul, for cut you short, Paul. There is one comment on the last slide. If you want to go back one.
Sure.
Hi, Paul. This is Soban.
Hi, Soban.
I just had one point on this. So, coming from the context of right now, there's some engagement of two instant payment platforms integrating with each other, the GCC and Pakistan. One question that comes to my mind is that, so there's one thing to enable multi-currency, having the ability to have two currencies and transact in two currencies. And the other is that conversion, the PVP component that you talked about. What we're seeing right now is that component is limited to the RTGS platforms across both regions. Mm-hmm. So the enablement has been of the sort that the conversion needs to happen on the RTGS. The payment platforms, the instant payment platforms need to be able to just transact in a particular currency from one to the other. So for example, a dirham account for Buna and a dirham account for a Pakistani FI. So my question really is that, do we need to look at the PVP component in our payment platform as well? Or would we rather, at this point in time, perhaps let that stay with the RTGS where it typically stays, the DVPs, the PVPs, and those components currently?
Well, there are certainly some deployments that are looking at doing exactly this, particularly in Southern Africa and potentially in Myanmar as well. So I think it depends on your particular circumstances of your particular deployment. If it's not applicable in Pakistan, then fine, so be it. But we're trying to develop something which is not generic, but can be applicable in a broad variety of contexts. So okay. Is that an appropriate answer, or do you think I'm missing something here?
No, that's an appropriate answer for sure. My only concern was that the segregation of responsibilities, I see the central banks tending to lean to do these transactions on the RTGS rather than the retail payment platform. So that is where my concern was coming from, but I get your point.
If you're using the RTGS, is that bulk forex settlement or bulk exchange settlement, so as opposed to retail?
No, wouldn't be bulk. So FIs on the RTGS do gross settlement net settlement for the FXs to each other in a PVP manner, as you pointed out.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Thank you.
So can I quickly? So I want to confirm your comment is correct. So you're saying that it's bilateral net over RTGS. it's not multilateral net, but it is deferred. So so they have the ability to collect transactions throughout the day and avoid the transaction charges and timing.
They tend to queue those transactions, so they can defer it in that sense, but they are settled nonetheless on a net basis, on a transaction by transaction basis. They don't batch them together.
I'm sorry, so they're gross then, they're not net.
I'm so sorry, you're right. I'm so
Okay.
sorry for mixing those two terms. My
Okay,
bad.
so no, but we're just trying to sort out because we do have, these things are actually, Paul, as you know, broken apart somewhat. The way in which we allow you to hold multiple ledgers for clearing purposes at the central system that we then allow for settlement of those currency types, which is deferred to whatever the settlement system is to carry out. If that happened to be the RTGS, it should work. And thirdly, we have, at least in development, Michael could talk to it, the gross settlement capability. I'm not sure how all these three things mix together, but it would be something to maybe process a bit, because it sounds like your situation is similar but not identical to what Myanmar is looking for.
Yeah.
I know, well, in Pakistan, Rust do this gross settlement. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, so Rust right now being single currency, they do gross settlement 2 times a day, but that is irrespective of it being Forex or anything. That's business as usual for them.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I agree. It's nothing to do with Forex. It's just this settlement model. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I just want to remind everybody on Zoom that you now have the ability to unmute. You can just raise your hand and we'll recognize you and give you a chance to speak. Paul, over to you.
Okay, thanks. Back to ISO 222. I know this is something that Michael in particular has been very keen on. Michael, do you want to say anything on this? See a tiny figure in the distance.
Sorry, shall I come up to the front? Would that be useful?
It doesn't matter. It's fine. I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, fine. So yes, I just want to pick up one comment before I talk about ISO, and that is to respond to Miller's query, say that we do currently support gross settlement in the switch. So that's available now. Okay, so ISO 20022. As you know, we are in the process of making an application. Now, one of the things that it's become clear to us that we need to do is to convince the International Standards Organization that this is not simply a single organization proposal, but that it meets a set of demands which are recognized generally as being distinct from the facilities that ISO 20022 currently provides, and of general application. Now, one of the things that I really want to do over the course of the next PI is to finish the PI with a fully functioning, independent special interest group, which is promoting both the business requirements and the technical requirements for an instant payments interoperable system for financial inclusion. So, as I say, I want to start forming that group as soon as possible and to start formulating that group's responses to make it clear that those things exist and that the task of evaluation of our existing proposal could safely be delegated to members from that group in order to decide what the eventual message content and message structures ought to be. So we currently have a business justification lodged with the ISO standards organization that will be available for comment and review by them until the latter part of this month. After that, they will either approve it or have further comments, and we will have to go back to it. But that means, I think, that by the early part of June, I would like to have at least an outline working organization where people can talk to each other about what the general requirements across developing economies in the entire world are, and how an instant payment system set of messages could meet those requirements. So that's my prime ask for this PI. There's going to be some other things going on. Pardon me. There are going to be some other things going on, but they are relatively light in terms of the request for resources, because we already have some people who are working on them.
Okay, so where do you think the members for this special interest group will come from?
Where do I think the
members for this special interest group?
Well, I'm
will come
hoping,
from?
actually, I'm looking around this room and hoping that I can see some people. Look, hey, sorry. And we've also, John Mark, excellent. John Mark is in. African Ender, I've heard from Robert for this morning that they definitely want to be part of this. But we want to cast our net, as I say, as wide as we possibly can. Any guys from Jordan? I saw them earlier, but...
You mean the JOPAC team?
Yes, indeed. They, since they are actually currently operating a system that works on ISO 20022 messages, they will have a very valuable input. So I'm hoping that we can persuade them to join us as well. So yes, but the wider the better.
How about outside the Moduloop community? Do you think? Yeah. Do you think that's valuable to get? The people who've been working on Rust, the people who've been working on PIX.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely right. And JOPAC is an example of that. So that's a non-modular.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's non-modular, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rust, I think, is another example. The other point that we'll need to start thinking about sooner rather than later is, and again, this is a point that I think the ISO 20022 standards group at the moment have not really had to think about very much, and that's about interoperability between flavors of ISO 20022. Now, one of the things, as we've said a number of times in the past, one of the things about the existing standard is that although it's supposed to be a standard, every implementation specializes it in a particular way. And it can easily be the case that those specializations mean that a message produced by an institution in one specialization can't be properly understood or accepted by an institution in another one. Now, that, as I say, it's a problem that we are going to have to deal with, because I think we expect that the same thing will be true of our proposed message set, that individual schemes will implement it in the ways that are most appropriate for them. And we will therefore, I think, as usual, need to grapple with this problem before the more traditional ISO committees actually need to think very hard about it.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Just one, taking this in a slightly different direction, do you think there is a need for any additional support in internalizing the ISO 20022 messaging within Moduloop?
Sorry, how do you mean?
So moving away over a period of however long from FSP IOP within and using ISO 222 messaging within. So between,
well, I'm happy to defer to my colleague Pedro, who I'm sure will corroborate my view that the vNext architecture will be very well adapted for plugging in not just FSP IOP and ISO 20022, but indeed any other message content which may come along. So I want to distinguish here between the message content and the structure of the dialogues and say our plan is that the structure of the dialogues, the process by which a transfer gets made, is something which is fundamental to the design of the Moduloop system. The content of the messages is not. And one of the tasks we set ourselves in designing the vNext architecture was to minimize the amount of effort that would be required to onboard a new set of message contents.
Is that going with or against the spirit of ISO 222, do you think? Because it feels like paying lip service.
No, I think it's going with. So one of the things, I had my wrist slapped many times by the ISO organization, and one of the occasions in which a particularly stinging slap was delivered was that I was told very clearly that you shouldn't talk about endpoints, APIs, nothing like that. This is about the content of messages. So what will happen is that we need to define the messages which are appropriate to our purposes. And there's some conceptual work that needs to happen there, I think. But also, once we've done that, the content of the messages is not the important thing. So an ISO 20022 message, as long as it does the same thing in the context of dialogue, it doesn't matter whether it's that or FSPI or indeed any other message type.
So effectively, the orchestration, the sequencing of messages is outside the ISO 222 standard.
Yes. Now, when you look at some of the ISO documentation, you might be forgiven for forming an alternative view. But in principle, this is just about the definition of message content, yes.
Yes. So we're going to end up with sorry, getting off subject. We're going to end up with another standard which talks about the sequencing of messages at some point.
Well, we have that standard already. So
we do. ISO don't.
No, they don't. And an example that I always find charming, so I'm going to say it again, is that when you look at the SEPA manual about how to do instant payments, it devotes 10 pages to the definition of how to do a payment and 100 pages to the topic of how to fix it when it's gone wrong. Now, that I think tells you something about the work that our original specification designers, interface designers, did, and how important it was.
Yeah, and how SEPA could not agree amongst themselves. Yes, indeed. Thank you, Michael. Is there anyone else who wants to talk on this subject? No. Okay.
Yeah, just briefly to expand on the choreography point. Hi, it's Jason Pollis here.
Hi, Jason. Sorry, I didn't see your hand up.
I'm working with Michael on the ISO 20022 submission. On the choreography piece, what the standard actually requires the choreography to be defined, but due to limitations of the registration authority, SWIFT, they haven't actually put that into the model. So what people have done instead with the choreographies is written documents about it. It simply hasn't been modeled carefully so far. And that becomes apparent when you implement some of the message definitions, in that there are gaps between some of the business processes that need to be done outside of the ISO messaging that have been registered so far. What we're looking to do after the business justification has been submitted and accepted is to carefully go through the existing module loop choreographies and model them and submit those models to the registration authority as well, so that both the people in the industry and existing users of module loop can have a consistent definition of how the module loop, well, the inclusive instant payment system messages should be used.
Thank you, Jason. That's really helpful. Sorry, just making notes. Okay, is there anyone else who wants to speak on this before we move on? I can't see anything in the room. And
no, can't see any
Jason,
hands.
Jason, your hand is still up. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move on then. Fraud tool integration. I think this is going to become an increasingly important issue. I mean, up till now, I think we've had an entirely defensible position that fraud is the responsibility of connected DFSPs. If you look what the FATF recommendations say, their focus is entirely on the fraud monitoring, the money laundering prevention measures which are defined in regulations, and those regulations, they say, apply to DFSPs, specifically regulated financial institutions. There is no mention anywhere in there about switchers. So this is effectively, we are able to say this is somebody else's problem. And my only concern about that is that when I talk to regulators, they are starting to look at switchers. They see switchers as the place where all the transactions go through. It's not just focused on an individual DFSP. You can see it end to end across an entire country if it's a national switch. So they want to be able to look to switchers to at least attempt to identify money laundering or fraud that is happening across multiple DFSPs. Now, this is an extremely challenging approach. Generally, of course, we don't have access to the identity data associated with transactions. We just see the transactions flying by. But I mean, 5 years ago, I was looking at efforts being made by some of the PSPs outside the Mojaloop community, where they were evaluating techniques around machine learning to try and tie transactions together from multiple institutions so that you can try and see where they are potentially involved in fraud or money laundering. Now, this is taking an inverted approach, if you like. So whereas up till now, the majority of fraud tools try and identify fraudulent transactions, instead these different techniques take the view that unless you can definitely say this is not fraud, then we will highlight it as fraud. And we are certainly not saying that we should be stopping a transaction which looks as though it might be fraud or money laundering. I think that's way beyond our scope and also way beyond feasibility, frankly. However, we should be in a position where we can highlight a transaction that has already completed, which may well be fraud, money laundering, or whatever it may be, and raise a suspicious transaction report with the DFSPs and potentially with the FIU as well. We know that Actio is moving to operational readiness. We had the discussion yesterday about that service. We know it can be integrated with Mojaloop, and in my view, we should be devoting resources to getting it integrated. I know it uses an ISO 222 interface, but that's not beyond our wit to use an adapter to connect into Actio. Taking the transaction stream and forwarding it to Actio for monitoring. It's going to become a requirement for large-scale deployments over the next couple of years, if not earlier. So we really need to be starting to address this. So can I open that to the floor for discussion, please? Is there anybody who thinks this is a ridiculous idea and we really shouldn't be getting involved in it? Or does anyone think this is something that we should be prioritizing? Is it just me? Hello?
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
Did I walk past something? Hi,
No
Paul.
worry.
Yeah, I think that, we need to find a way to start. And I think the starting point, as you described, is right. And we need to have a roadmap against that, and Actio and the like. Going down that path makes me quite comfortable. I just don't know if I don't want us to get caught up on not going anywhere because we're trying to get ahead of the, not starting and not going live with our current systems because we are wanting to be so totally ahead of the future regulate may happen. So so I kind of feel like this is a good slow burn activity in the background rather than something we should be, so things like Actio and that should be supported and continued in parallel, but not necessarily something we are principally focused on at the moment. My challenge to that statement is we have to look at what's going to affect adoption, right? And we know that in the RFPs we've seen, there have been queries about what is your plan for fraud and fraud monitoring going forward. And also because this is a, shall we say, slightly underserved space at the moment at the switch level. I think we've seen willingness from regulators and the like to accept the DFSP checking and responsibility model.
I think that's true, Warren. I think that's absolutely true. I don't disagree with anything you've just said. I would, in terms of should we actually deploy something at the moment? No, I'm not saying that. But I do think we need a credible roadmap and maybe even a proof of concept demonstrator, as opposed to really ready for deployment. It's another of those tick box things. You're being asked for it, so I want to be able to say, yes, we've done this work and we can operationalize it for you if necessary.
Yeah, agreed.
So this is Matt. I would speak on behalf of this one, just given the level, sort of the prevalence of existing authorized push payment fraud, as well as the rate of growth, suggests that this will be an area that regulators dive into if they haven't yet. It's coming and quickly. I do think it's sort of related to the 2022 work, and it might be interesting to sort of bridge those groups.
Okay.
Just to keep us from sort of redundant work.
Yes, I know a lot of the argument for ISO 20022 has actually been around those adjacent systems that can consume the messages and therefore make them more viable to manage and easier to manage. So that's the reason for the standard. And that's also the reason why it's about the message, not the orchestration of the message for most of them. So yeah, so it's definitely, but of those things, the thing we need to do at the moment, I think, is get the ISO 20022 stuff sorted, because that supports that outcome.
Yeah. It not only supports Actio, but other commercial offerings.
Well, any offering, yes. It's just
they're all based on that.
Yeah. I mean, Actio, I simply highlight it because it's an open source solution that we can bring into this. But they're all the commercial offerings are going to use that same ISO 222 messaging interface. But we do need some. Actually, do we need standardization work within that ISO 222 stream on what fraud monitoring looks like as well? What messages are required for fraud monitoring? Is it different from the transaction detail? I don't know.
Well, that is why the ISO messages are like they are, because they lowest common denominator for every piece of data you could ever need. So
yeah.
And then it also forces, in fact, Michael, who we were having the conversation with about why, if something was optional, it became mandatory, because then somebody said, well, I'm not prepared to accept a transfer which has an optional field, because it might be needed, it might be represent some kind of fraud vector, and therefore, but in some cases we can't provide that information, or different types of DFSPs can't provide that information. So a more tiered approach. So yes, the way it's described in ISO is necessary for it to be sufficient for fraud. But like we always talk about, these things need to be tiered, and we need to be spending time and effort promoting a a tiered approach to fraud, as well as KYC and everything else. These are bigger conversations which we need to have in a wider community than just us merger loopers. So very interesting how we can raise the profile of those kind of concepts in a non-confrontational way.
Yeah. I'm interested in the idea of a tiered approach to fraud.
Well, what I mean,
explain what you mean by that.
What I mean is, what I'm meaning is, if the amount of data required to be comfortable of doing a $10 million transaction versus a $1 transaction is the problem. And what we see with the current ISO 20022 networks and SWIFT and cross borders and everything is that you need to provide the same data whether you're moving $1 or lots of dollars, and that is not always appropriate. But that is a long, difficult conversation to be had, and to be able to say that you can, and this is where switches can, in my view, really play an important role, because you can get an aggregated view of flows more easily than an individual DFSPs. So
yes, exactly.
Doing that flag which says, hey, $1 is not subject to the same constraints, but we've just seen 1 million of those.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point.
Please go and have a look, right?
1 million of them from different sources.
Yeah, and that's a more I would hesitate to say intelligent way, but it's a more appropriate way to, I think, manage and adapt to it. So rather than put such onerous constraints on doing a valid $1 transaction that it would immediately resolve fraud of $1, have a way to flag it and escalate it. So that's what I mean by.
Yeah. I think we're agreed on this, because individual fraudulent transactions, that's all very well, but the whole point of operating at the switch level is that you can see those aggregated fraud issues arising from multiple sources and multiple destinations, which at the moment is invisible to the financial system as a whole, because people are doing it just at the DFSP level. And that's why regulators are starting to say we need to move to the switch level. Jason, do you want to come in?
Hi, there is an initiative in the UK with Pay.UK, and I think supported by the Bank of England as well and the Metropolitan Police, for creating a new set of fraud messages in the ISO 20022 realm. So it's well before the business justification, and they expect it will take about a year to get that up and running. And so I can approach them and find out if they'd be interested in widening their membership of the development, and whether they're already working with other organizations as well. Now, should they, or should MergerLoop be engaged on behalf of the community in that work, or should there be individual organizations who are in the MergerLoop community who'd be interested in the forward messaging?
Bought all of that. Jason, my internet connection was a bit unstable there. But yes, I certainly caught what you were saying about the UK-based effort to get fraud messaging to 220. So yeah, I think that's worth pursuing further.
Hey, Paul, this is Pedro. So given, and I'm going to address specifically the integration part of it, given that this is an integration and that we have a view on what vNext would do in terms of integration and facilitate different types of integration in an easier way with adaptation layers, would this be one of those prime candidates for that sort of discussion? Can we make a generic way of integrating with external systems so that we can have an outbound stream of data, whatever the format, so that we are not dependent on whatever format we use today or the outside system needs to ingest. And we can quickly create connectors or pieces of software that are fairly light and fairly simple to create and easy to create to integrate with whatever external system we have, be Actio and whatever in the future. And also on the reverse direction as well. So today we're not talking about interjection, but maybe in the future we have that ability or we have that desire. And this doesn't need to be real-time interjection. And I'm not going to go into those details, but my point is, would this be one of those things that might benefit from a longer discussion about how can we change the way we do integrations in Moduloop, which obviously we're already designed for the vNext. So this is more of a question about, would this benefit from that discussion and taking a bit of time and doing it in a slightly different way?
Yeah, it sounds like it would, based on what you're saying. So that's an argument for us to perhaps open a broader discussion on how you do these integrations, moving beyond merely fraud, but to other integrations as well. Would you agree with that? Have I understood you correctly?
Yes, that was it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to say anything on this?
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Leanna speaking from JOPAC again. Adding to the integration, at JOPAC, we actually studied certain models related to fraud monitoring tools as a system operator, as a switch and hub operator. For the integrations, we also thought of integrating with the DFSPs themselves to actually inform them in case we want to deploy, of course, a monitoring tool at our end to inform them of certain cases, because there are two parts of within the transaction itself. So we were discussing like whom to actually inform. Are those the DFSPs? And if we want to inform the DFSPs, then we actually need a feedback from the DFSP, because it's their customers that are involved in the fraudulent action. So I think it's worth discussing this as well.
Do you need feedback? Do you need feedback from the DFSPs? Why?
Because like they would have more information about their customers. They have the full KYC of the customer.
Yeah. But isn't it once you raise a concern with the DFSP, isn't it their problem, not yours anymore?
Because like we thought of, so it's a shared responsibility. And, you know, when you consider fraud management or case management, we thought of actually integrating the case management with the DFSPs whom customers are involved in the fraudulent or the suspicious transaction. I don't want to call it fraudulent because you still need more confirmation from the entities who actually have the full KYC of their customers.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I just wanted you to clarify that, because that's what I was hoping you'd say. Thank you.
Hi, Paul. This is Tân.
Hi, Tân.
Hi, I actually second that, because DFSP knows their customer more. And if they find out sooner, if there is a place to flag it, it'd be really nice for other DFSPs to be aware of this type of fraud. So it's really a good thing to implement it. But Ni was asking, are you not interested in this tool, fraud integration, as a priority? From, I think, my perspective, I was thinking that would it be better to use tools that are like best of breed for fraud monitoring, as opposed to including it right in the core Moduloop, but make it easy to integrate with them? So, or for the outside tools to be able to make use of like either logs or things that we can feed to or integration, so that we can make use of tools to monitor that, as opposed to building it out in the whole core. I'm not sure.
Let me just add that it could even be a service that we might opt to use, or not just a tool. It is badly needed, but like Tân said, perhaps whether it is part of the core is something that we can all
Sorry, it seems to me that what people are talking to here is some sort of shared KYC service, which is in development in many countries, but is outside scope from Moduloop, certainly. So sharing that data on individual customers between multiple DFSPs, that is a whole new domain that doesn't really fall within modular loop, but it is a perfectly valid requirement. I agree. I just wonder whether we're going too far and trying to bring that into the modular loop domain, to be honest. Would anyone disagree with me? Am I wrong on this? Michael, online?
Yeah, just as a general comment, in my opinion, I think that what Sin and the previous speaker are saying is that actually has relevance, as you say, because if I think about it just in terms of anti-malware software these days, a lot of companies are setting up centralized databases where sort of bad behavior or whatever you'd like to call it, fraud is noted just as a central reference for everybody, so that everybody's aware of it simultaneously. And I think that has some relevance to the modular loop platform, and I think it would actually be a good thing to include. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Okay, I'll take that on board then. But I would emphasize again that it sounds very close to shared KYC services that are currently much in discussion across financial sectors and with regulators around the world. So I'm just wondering whether what we're saying is it something that is needed, but that doesn't necessarily mean it falls within modular loop. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, sure.
Isn't that, I mean, that's what Thin was saying as well. What I understood you saying, Thin, it's best of, we could use best of breed. We should be able to plug and play. Again, it comes back to the whole, why we are emphasizing the ISO 20022 compliance is because we can then plug into that entire ecosystem, right? We don't need to reinvent every single spoke on the wheel.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Thank you, Warren. Okay, I'm being told that we really need to hurry up because we've only done 3 so far. Merchant payments. I think this is a very important use case. It follows just behind P2P in importance in terms of achieving scale, in my view, for any deployment. You'll have seen from, when was it, Tuesday, that we've done some design work. A simple proof of concept has been built, but there is so much more work that is needed. We need work on the merchant registry. We need delegation of merchant registration processes. We need proper QR code generation, data signing, generation of codes, distribution, etc. We need merchant ID generation, so UBO monitoring, sorry, ultimate beneficial owner, so you know who actually owns the merchant. Links to real-time data on merchant activity. There's a lot of work on the development of business processes around this as well. It's not just the technology. There's a whole pile of stuff that needs to be done before we can bring secure merchant payments in. We've looked at QR, but we've also looked at USSD using the same rails. Can I make a plea that we expend some effort on this, because I think it's really important. It's going to become important for WinePay as well, as I say, just behind P2P. Is there anybody who would speak against me on this? No, so is this a shoe-in? We're definitely going to do merchant payments. Anyone want to say anything about it? Anyone want to speak for it?
I was volunteering John Mark. This is Lewis here.
Hi, Lewis.
No, I think the scheme component is something that I'd really like to nail down and have. I know that there's the EMV Co examples, or they have their own way of doing things. It would be just interesting to look at other cases for static QR and see what's applicable in our use case. And I think also just have a really clear understanding of what is modular loops part in this versus what is something that a scheme wanted to deploy merchant payments, what they have to bring themselves and build themselves?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Where is the divider? I mean, I think what I'd like to see out of this is sufficient scaffolding to get a scheme to be able to deploy fairly easily, connecting into a Mojo Loop hub. But doesn't mean we have to do everything for them. On the subject of EMVCo, I don't have any ties to that at all. The EMVCo data format is not something that has any particular value beyond the fact that EMVCo defined it. It is a data format that we could use, or we could define our own, or a scheme could define its own. I think possibly we need to leave that decision to an individual scheme, but provide the tools to plug into their particular schema. Of course, EMVCo is a lot more than just the QR code standard. There's an awful lot more as well. And there, I think we would diverge.
Yeah. Another question, just from some conversations I've had this week, has been around, is it possible to grandfather in existing merchants onto a common merchant scheme? So if you're, if you've got two big competitors in a market that have signed up thousands and thousands of merchants across the country, you don't want to have to go and issue them new QR codes. What would be great is if you could kind of adopt the existing schemes almost as under an umbrella, and the DFSPs are responsible for issuing QR codes.
Well, first on the second point, or last point, DFSPs should be responsible for issuing QR codes, be it dynamic or static. On the
yes, but who
grandfathering,
owns the private key?
Well, that you can solve. I mean, you just have a scheme private key, and then you derive keys for DFSPs, so they can be traced back to the master private key.
But if you've already issued thousands of static QRs across your country, then how do you bring?
Then you can't use the signing element in that. You'd have to trust the validity of those QR codes. So it's something that we could be doing, but we'd have to think about whether we should. Those QR codes, that is an argument for using the EMVCo standard, because virtually all of those schemes do use EMVCo for the QR code standard, but that's only data content, data formatting. There would be issues with using that because you'd be using the issuer's merchant ID. You wouldn't have control over merchant ID, and you'd lose a lot of the potential fraud management, and you wouldn't have the mechanism for translating between that merchant ID and the DFSP account that they want to receive payments in. So it would be tricky, but not insurmountable.
Yeah.
It depends on how that particular scheme has implemented the merchant ID piece.
Okay. Cool. Fun things to think about.
Yeah. It's an argument for saying there is a lot of work here, if you want to bring those considerations in.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Lewis.
Just on the topic, Lewis probably wanted me to disagree with the statement. Lewis, is it true?
No, you have so much more knowledge and context than I do, John.
Yeah, and I'm just joking. So I'm in agreement. I think the statement was well captured. Important use case following just behind P2P. I think we've been having these discussions with the team, the physical team here in the convening around the criticality of merchant interoperability. From a practical case, I think I've been able to share with a couple of colleagues what I see already in the markets. We have the closed loop merchant payments in the market. So the next level is for us to add value by giving a proposition that brings merchant interoperability. Of course, the details are put forward, registry, delegation, the discussion around the QR codes standard, EMVCo, I mean, those details will be part of the work stream. But the criticality, I think we are fully aligned. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. Okay, given the amount we've got to get through, I'll close this discussion for now, if that's okay, and move on to the next one. New operator portals. Now, as part of the work around the finance portal at the hub, we've developed a microservice-oriented architecture, which allows us to develop new portals. And we think that certainly for the WinePay deployment, for example, we have a reasonable selection of portals, and there are obviously things that we'd like to add to that, but we don't necessarily want to determine. So this is really a plea to the WinePay team and others. What portals are we missing? Can we just address these in a deployment neutral way? So not just for WinePay, but applicable to other deployments as well. And tell me which portals you think we're missing. So over to you. Let's choose Thin. Go on.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
I've typed it in Slack as well. It's the DFSP portal that we would like to have. So DFSP, I believe this will be applicable to all the hub operators, not just WinePay. So for settlement, we have to generate 2 reports per DFSP, the detailed report and summary report, so that they can approve and reconcile the settlement. As of now, these 2 reports, we have to generate and put it in a document management system. That's a separate system in different places to make sure that we deposit in the right folder, everything. As we have many more DFSPs, it will be a challenging task to make sure that we deposit in the right place and everything's going smoothly. So what we're requesting is for a DFSP portal where they can log in securely and see those reports right from the DB, push it out there so that there's no manual intervention of having to download and push the reports in each folder. And it has a track record of things as
Okay,
well.
I've got great news for you then. That's already
there?
That's already there. That's already being developed. Yeah. So, but rather than pushing it out to them, give them access through Payment Manager, so they can go into Payment Manager and see their settlement reports specific to that DFSP.
Right. But what if there are people who are using other integration platforms? We would like it to be a part of hub operation, hub portal type thing, right, as opposed to tying it up to a specific payment manager or a specific place, because this is needed for all the participants. So we don't want to necessarily tie it there, but it's really great that it's there. But we still would like to have it in a place, in a hub place, like central place, because that could be like Payment Hub and other people who may want to connect directly using some SDK and stuff.
They will be available through the hub anyway. But yes, is there anything else you feel is really missing, portal wise? I mean, you said DFSP, but then you talk about settlement reports. Are there other things we should be making available to DFSPs, or are there DFSP management functions that you feel that you should have at the hub?
Right. The other reports, I mean, we can add functionality.
Not reports. I'm leaving reports out. I'm leaving reports out because are there functions, management functions that you feel you need?
Not at the moment, but for a settlement bank as well. I mean, they need those reports. I mean, not just the DFSPs, but the settlement themselves can sign in and do stuff as well. For now, that's the great part, if we can have it as the hub, not necessarily just in Payment Manager.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm using the advantage of proximity here. But I just think there are 2 key things I'd like to make us think about. Not that I disagree with any of this, but firstly, the fact payment manager can allow you to access that, what that actually means is that there is an API at the hub that we can build many ways to access. Most importantly, we believe, if you have an established big DFSP, they're likely to want to actually integrate to that API to pull it into their system themselves, because they'll already have a system to manage and ingest and do whatever. Of course, we also believe fundamentally that settlement reports are an anomaly of the past rather than something of the future that we want to be asking people to keep doing reconciliation against, because that's the whole point, right? But
absolutely. Yeah.
But
they're a comfort blanket.
Yeah. So so it's a bit of a interesting conundrum there, but yes. So I think but I think we must probably need to just think about where that fits in our order of priorities and resourcing. If it's available as an API, then obviously anybody could add an additional way of accessing that. There's a lot of complication to, of course, manage it on the at the hub, but it's totally possible. With the data management system, expand all of that micro front end. So you could do what we're outlining, yeah. And also there's the opportunity to just say, doing that would be an interim solution just to make people feel comfortable in the first few times, and then they're never going to use it again. So is there another way we can do that? And that's part of why it's nice to have it be presented in Payment Manager. And I see Paul's raised his hand, so he might have...
I was about to call on him, so he got his hand up just in time.
You might say something like, because it's done in Payment Manager and it's a micro front end, it could also be done wherever else you like it to be.
Yeah, Paul,
But
please.
I still feel that it's value in having it in a central place. The user experience is the same way. So everybody participating in this switch will have the same experience because the settlement reports, as opposed to them having to build API and have different. I think it's part of hub functionality for people to be able to retrieve the reports, have a place, safe place where the reports are.
Hub functionality. I think as you add more, this is just.
Can I ask Paul to interject here, please? Yeah.
I'll keep that.
There's one disadvantage in doing it that way, Finn, but I do agree long term we do need something like that. But the one disadvantage is that means that at the hub we need to keep track of each individual user at the DFSP if we want to do proper RBAC, or are we going to give one login credentials for the whole DFSP and they're going to log in? It just means that we need to get down at a lower level. The nice thing about having the payment manager integration is we've really got a customized RBAC with roles that's local to the users at the DFSP, and they care about that. And they can update it and manage the passwords and do all of that maintenance and control, and yet then still have that access to that report directly. So but I hear what you're saying. One thing I want us to also talk about is participant lifecycle, because onboarding a participant is complicated. There's a technical onboarding, there's a business onboarding, there's the testing process that needs to happen. Right now, we've got a solution that's working, but we know we are in the process of improving that. But it would be nice to have this sort of consolidated approach for managing the DFS or the participants' sort of interaction from the hub's point of view. I feel like that's a missing part. So my vote would be if we needed to add more portals on the front end, it would be to sort of extend that functionality to really think clearly about what a technical onboarding and a business onboarding means and how they interact with each other, and you might find that you have some participants who are not playing nicely, and so you might want to put them on terms, but allow them to still proceed and integrate but at a different level, and that might be included in the scheme design. But right now we've got no way of doing that except manually, and I don't know if you see that as being a big issue or not. I would be interested in your comments then.
Thank you, Paul. Let me just interject with one thing before then, and another colleague response regarding the RBAC. And I think for the onboarding, you are absolutely right. There is a onboarding from the business side and also from the technology side when we are onboarding the DFSPs. And I think that's the hub's responsibility to make sure that we are also creating the correct users in the system to access the system. So I do see the importance of having the right RBAC, but that will be the hub's responsibility to make sure that we are creating user-specific accounts for the DFSPs to access the portal, not one generic account for the entire DFSP, but a specific user with the right permission to access these resources in the portal.
Yeah, if you're going to have a hub, sort of a hub portal, that's the only way to do it, really.
Right. Hey, this is Pedro again. So I'm going to address the reporting part in and give a bit of light of what we did in terms of design for the reference architecture and what we are now implementing in VNext, which will obviously not be available soon enough. The need that was recognized during the reference architecture discussions was that we do in fact need one generic reporting facility. So, and it's kind of the same logic that that I mentioned before for the fraud management, which is we need a common way and a standard way for Moduloop to output data. And for the fraud management, for example, it could be a stream of data that someone can ingest and either directly or through connectors. And for the reporting, it will be exactly the same thing. So effectively, what we are designing for the next version is to have a mechanism that is constantly outputting a stream of data to a reporting side of the system. This has several benefits. One of those benefits is that the reporting is a separate system. So it means that you can report at will. It's not going to hurt the performance of the transactional system. So it's a read-only from the outside perspective. The other benefit is that in an initial phase, we don't have to provide a reporting mechanism. Anyone can plug in their own reporting mechanism. So if you have already a business intelligence tool, you might be able to ingest that data and mash up that data, given that you have the right access. So that's the perspective on reporting. And again, this is just from a future perspective. It's not going to be there. But again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but my ask is, if there's will to put resources on this, I think this is another great chance for us to have someone helping out on the VNext, because this is one of those things that we can tactically start building on the outside, and we can even use it in the current version that we have. With the right design, we can do something that is both useful for today, and we can retrofit in the future for the VNext architecture. And this, I think, would address the concerns. I'm not going to go into the role-based. We can save that discussion for later. So that was just my comment on the reporting. I think we need that generic facility, and if there's resources, then please let's discuss that.
Thanks, Pedro. Okay.
There's this one input that I'd like to add over here. So we have seen deployment in Pakistan being happening for the instant payment system, and there had been single portal given to DFSPs by the vendor or the central bank, whereby they can do a lot of things in the same portal. So you say you have a view of what are your pre-funding limits are. You see, you can see how many you can say aliases have been subscribed into your DFSPs and all these things. So as soon as the traction comes in alias-based payment, you see a lot of aliases being registered, some bogus aliases being registered or something like that. So these things are something that are like viewable under this portal to central bank, to DFSPs. So these are the things which are integral to that portal, whereby so there are different role-based access. So there is a central hub access, there is a DFSP access, there is a security officer access. So the complete workflows are embedded into that one portal. So say if there is a participant coming in, that participant essentially will go through a workflow of first getting a certificate issued, and then that that request goes to a security officer approves it. As soon as the security officer approves it, a certificate is issued and then sent to the participant. So entire process of certificate creations to distribution is right embedded into that portal. I see that it actually streamlines the entire process. So certificate creation, DFSP's limit adjustment, DFSP's complete view around account lookup services, and other things that essentially becomes the part of this portal. I'm not sure like if that is in the roadmap of Moja Loop, but when you compare Moja Loop with the current commercial offerings that is being done in the market, the likes of regulators, the likes of central banks will actually compare it in this manner.
Yes, I agree. I agree with you. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut the discussion here on this. We've used all of our scheduled time and we're not even halfway through, so we need to move on. So thank you. Next one is enhanced MSISDN routing. So this is looking at all those countries that see users with multiple wallets on a smartphone. So you can't do a payment to an MSISDN because which wallet do you mean? I mean, for WinePay in Myanmar, we're using a shortcode based solution. So you identify your wallet and then identify the MSISDN you want to send it to. And that kind of works, but it's not great. So the proposal is that we develop a solution which will allow us to reverse this model, to specify an MSISDN, and then the Oracle can come back via Moja Loop with a list of valid wallets for the payer to choose from, which seems a much more customer user-friendly solution certainly for P2P payments. Does anyone have any views on this? I know, Steve, you were you were a proponent of this over the last couple of days. If you're there, I can't see if you're there or not.
See, I think this is a question. I'm not sure that this is the solution that we want to look at, but this is something this is definitely a problem that we're all facing, is how do we route when when a single identifier can point to multiple accounts, particularly MSISDN. And so I think I would like us to at least address it. This was one option to address it in a way that could be user-friendly, but I'm open to other ones. But this is the best one we're thinking about right now. But I would like us to address this because it is something that is coming up in every market.
Yep. Can I ask Michael to say something on this? Because you did have some thoughts on this.
Can I talk for Michael? Is that okay? This is Layana from Joe Park. So basically, we addressed this issue in Jordan with two models. The first one was actually the customer can select a default account to receive the funds. And the second one was, as a sender, I can say I want to send to this account at this DFSP. So we had two approaches toward solving this issue.
Thank you.
So a couple of points. As Steve says, this is not a Musden problem.
No, I agree.
It's an identifier problem in general.
Yeah.
But there are One thing that makes the Misden version of the problem specialized is that whichever DFSP you route to, you can more or less guarantee that you're reaching the right person because the Misden belongs to the person. In the case, for instance, of bank accounts, that's not true. To have duplicate bank account numbers, particularly in jurisdictions that don't have very reliable branch identification processes, the chances are high that there will be duplicate bank account numbers and very low that those will refer to the same institution. So that's a thing that we need to address. The other point, I want to pick up Leona's point here and say that we have a specialized set of problems here in that we don't have direct access to the participants, to the DFSPs. All we can do is to provide centralized services which are usable by the DFSPs. And therefore, effectively, so if you look at a situation where you return a list of possible DFSPs that might, to which you might route a particular identifier, there is no guarantee that that's being returned to a DFSP which will know how to do something about it.
Yep.
So there's got to be some stuff on the top of that, which means it will work in a situation where you're dealing with DFSPs who may be very small institutions where they can't deal with multiple assignments or choose between them. It's the case is similar. We've looked in the past about techniques by which we might allow participants to specify that if a particular Misden, their Misden is quoted, they would like it to be routed to a particular provider. The problem again there is that we don't have any direct access to the DFSPs at the moment. And we've always drawn back from giving or from taking the responsibility ourselves for any direct interaction with individual accounts. Our view is that it's the DFSPs, the account holding institutions, who talk to customers. We never talk to them directly. So I'm not saying there isn't a way through it, or indeed that the way you propose isn't workable, but there are problems in this area, as Paul says, and as Steve says, they're problems we need to solve because everybody who is trying to route using identifiers faces the same set of problems. But it's not as easy as it looks.
Okay, thank you, everyone. As I said, we're time pressured, so let's move on. Level 1 compliant mandates. I know mandates are anathema to the modular loop world, but we know also that they're an important part of support for business, encouraging acceptance. Regular payments, etc., reduce significantly the costs for businesses to accept payments, electronic payments. So there is a business reason for asking for it. And again, this is one of those tick box things where people ask if you can support them. But we also know that mandates, as they are implemented in Europe, North America, elsewhere, are not level 1 compliant. And I would argue actively militate against take-up by the underserved. They're one of the primary reasons why those who are underserved say they do not wish to become more included. They're a significant barrier to inclusion. So we need to develop a mandate model that meets the needs of not just business, but also customers. So business has to compromise a little if they want mandates. I think that we've all talked about potential solutions to this over recent years. I think there are a number of routes through to implementation of something that would be level 1 compliant. I would argue that we need to build some sort of proof of concept in order to assess these and see whether they are acceptable to the community as a whole and to the end customer. I think that's all I want to say now. Does anyone want to speak against? Should I put my hard hat on and wait for people to shout at me? anyone going to say anything?
So actually, Paul, believe it or not, I'm going to argue against this one.
Right, go on.
I know I've been the proponent of it. I would say, yes, we need it. It's one of those things of critical, potentially not urgent. As we look around at who are the people what are the next deployments, as much as we've talked about, this is a check the box for future RFPs, but we also have people who are trying to deploy right now and have problems right now. And I haven't heard this one coming from them. They're talking about P2P operations portals, merchant payments, PISP. These are the things that the next adopters who have already agreed to use Mojaloop are asking for. And so I would say this is in the critical, not urgent somehow. So I would say if there's time, I'm all for it. But
fine.
I haven't heard anybody asking for it this week.
Okay, fine. I'm happy to take that on board. Anyone else want to say it should be kicked into the long grass?
Yeah.
Okay.
So as far as I understand it, businesses like mandates because they reduce the uncertainty that they will not get paid.
They reduce cost. They reduce cost.
Well, the cost is the cost of reducing the uncertainty themselves, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's the cost of not having to solicit payment on each payment due date.
I think it's different from that, actually. I think the cost is the cost that you might not get paid. Now, it would be perfectly possible, I think, as we all know, to implement a mandate thing that just says, well, at a certain frequency, every week or every month or something like that, I just send a request to pay to the person that I want to pay. And if they pay, great. And if they don't, then I'll have to wait for my money. And that, I think, illustrates clearly that the problem is you want to be able to constrain payment in the future. Now, the level 1 compliant part of that says we should never constrain payment in the future, because for the very poor, who are the people fundamentally that we're trying to serve, they need to have control over the state of their accounts, because
I completely agree. Yeah,
I'm sure. I never doubted it.
Yeah. They do need to have that control, but we can give them the control whilst assisting take up by business, because whilst I would strongly agree that we are trying to serve the very poor, there is little point in connecting to something that has nothing that they want to use it for. So we have to actually attach as many services as possible for them to access. And this is about facilitating as many services as possible.
Okay.
But I'm quite happy to accept that it is not a priority, and I'm quite happy to see this left in the backlog. Okay, let's move on, since that's clearly the sentiment of the room. Unless last chance for anyone to dissent? Nope. Okay, let's move on. Bulk payments. So we're in the middle of developing a short-term solution for WinePay during this current PI. That's being developed by Motorsbox. But this short-term solution, as I said on Tuesday, won't support G2P or ECT. So it won't support salaries, it won't support social payments, etc. It's strictly a low volume solution. We think we have a medium-term solution that we've identified, and this is a solution that is needed by every deployment. So first question is the solution that we've identified the right solution? Is there something better? And secondly, we need this. We need a medium-term solution that can support G2P, ECT in relatively short order. I mean, it's not as urgent as the short-term solution we're developing now, but it's going to mention it's going to follow on shortly after. So we need support, I think, to develop that medium-term solution. Anyone willing to devote time to this? Bearing in mind that ECT is a requirement for pretty much every deployment. No. Paul, did you want to say something? Or did you leave your hand up? Yeah.
No, I would. Shouldn't this be a place where we interface with some other open source solution? Because
well,
I think this is a lot harder than it looks on the surface. I think, and if you dig a little bit below the surface, it's quite a complicated setup and system.
I would agree entirely. ECT is an extremely complex solution, but that's you can separate the ECT piece on the identification and registration of beneficiaries, the assessment of the particular demographics and the allocation of payments to individuals or to households, or whether they're conditional payments, etc. That's separate from making the actual payment. And we need to focus purely on the payment side, but we need to be able to accept a list of 10,000 people. The other bit, that's not our remit within Mojaloop. I'd entirely agree. It's something that could be done with OpenG2P, and I know there was discussion on that yesterday. I don't know if Ed's in the room or not, but yeah, I mean, this is about an integration with OpenG2P or commercial tools as well. All those tools developed by people like the World Food Programme. They don't do the payments piece, they just do the beneficiary management piece, and they rely on someone else to do the payments. And I'd like that someone else to be us.
Well, I'm going to make a case probably for Ed, who's not in the room, but I do think I'd like to see the integration into a beneficiary management system part of what we do with this PI. So always building towards something, not in our own box. So I agree with everything you said, but I would say making sure that we out of the box have the ability to connect into OpenG2P and other BMS, I think is critical. So I'd like to add that to this medium-term solution.
I would entirely agree with you. Those of you who have heard me talk in the past know that I could be quite evangelical about the need to integrate with OpenG2P. So yeah, I would like to see that. Bringing that open source initiative in a space that we're not light in, but to provide a solution to the government, to the NGO. I think we need that integration. I was speaking to somebody just yesterday actually about a potential deployment in East Africa, which would require integration with OpenG2P. But I'll pursue that separately.
Yeah, so I just like, Paul, if I may, to second what Steve said. I mean, we heard from Ed earlier in the week about the fact that that they've got a working solution of this kind, and I think probably one of the things that we should do is investigate whether we can use it as part of a Mojaloop deployment, so that we don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
We want to reinvent this.
I understood from the G2P discussion and the payment hub discussion that they had, that they were demonstrating that they did have that connectivity. Isn't the G2P solution complete in that regard?
Yes, that's my understanding too.
Good, good.
At OpenG2P meetings, they have, they've said clearly that they have a solution in that area, that it's working, that it's available, and that they would like to see it integrated with Mojaloop deployments.
Yeah. Okay, so I suspect the real challenge is having a Mojaloop deployment to connect to, but that could just be me being cynical. So yeah, so I think we're all violently agreeing OpenG2P is the way to, partnering with them is the right way to go. I think just about the short-term solutions and things we're talking about, it actually deals with the really interesting problem that sometimes while we'd like, part of the reason we ended up down this road with the WinePay situation is because of the way group loans are issued, which is a particular anomaly around the MFI space, which is great.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
But what it also did was identify for us that sometimes the actual DFSP to which we are paying, sometimes they do not have bulk facilities.
Yep.
So this interim solution or short-term solution is actually a really good model for us to work out, and I suspect it's a mode we're going to have to support in cases going forward, and we should think a little bit about how we standardize that, so that where people are fully supportive of bulk, we can use the bulk interface, which the core merge loop platform does provide at the moment. It hasn't been commercially exploited yet, but it will be soon. But actually to be able to switch between those different modes of performance and interaction, I think will be very useful for uplifting DFSPs who can't support it out of the box, but maybe encouraged in the future.
I think for the foreseeable future, we're always going to have the capability to support the demultiplexing at the recipient end, the payee end. Because there will always be, or for a long time, there will be wallets that cannot accept bulk lists, for example.
Correct.
So it's just a question of whether you do it at the payer end or the payee end. And I'd rather do it at the payee end. Okay, moving on. I'm conscious of time. Sorry, Warren, you wanted to say something?
No, happy to move on.
AISP. We know we've had the presentations from Sam and others that 3PPI PISP is now pretty much ready for deployment. But we know from other markets that payment initiation is only half the story. If PISP is going to take off, then customers need account information as well. And that's the AISP side of the jigsaw, the account information service provider. So AISP and PISP are complementary to the extent that we could actually piggyback on the Moja Loop 3 PPI implementation, which, as you'll know if you were paying attention, has two parts. There's the implementation at the hub, and there's the facilitation at the DFSP's payment manager side as well. So a fintech wanting to take advantage of PISP connects to the PISP service at the hub and accesses the DFSP to get permission via the PISP element of payment manager. So for AISP, we'd need to extend this somewhat. So we'd need to extend the PISP interface to offer account information, and we need to extend the payment manager implementation to support access to account info. So balances certainly, transactions probably, but not necessarily Moja Loop transactions. So these transactions might be happening on us. They might never have gone through Moja Loop, just as an aside. I think this is an important element of making 3PPI successful in the medium long term, by providing people with information at the very simplistic level of their balance before they actually initiate a transaction through an app. Does anybody want to say anything on this?
Yeah, Paul, thank you. This is Lewis here.
Lewis.
Yeah, so I agree with you very much so. This is kind of one of the things we were always thinking in the design of the third-party API was we don't have the ability to check a balance, and we need that. Just to kind of add a bit of context, I mean, this is the reason we called it the third-party API, not the PISP API, because we knew that there'd be further sorts of features that would be coming along that we'd want to support. So from an API design point of view, this is very simple. We talked about this, I think, last night as well, was we just add another sort of consent flag to say, yes, I consent for my account information to be read. And there might be different layers of granularity to that, perhaps. And we add a new endpoint. The biggest challenge here is going to be, at least from my knowledge, is going to be the fetching of account, or the linking of accounts to a PISP. We currently use a strong FIDO authentication to initiate the transaction, and that seems unsuitable for these sorts of interactions. So things like that AISPs want to do, for example, looking at the UK market, which is budgeting tools, tracking and stuff like that. Some of that stuff would need to happen offline, potentially, depending on the granularity of the data, or stuff that would need to happen without explicit consent every single time the AISP wanted to pull the set of accounts. This is where we got stuck in the design of some of the PISP stuff, and we abandoned the initial idea of having account balances because it was just very difficult to do. I know that in the UK case as well, you have to constantly be logging in back into your account, your bank account with your AISP, and renewing those credentials because there's no sort of refresh token or way to do that. So I completely agree. I think this is important. I'm curious as to see if there's anyone in particular asking for it. I'm sure there is, but who those people are. And that issue of it's a slightly different consent model and a different authentication mechanism was probably where we might get stuck here.
Yeah. Is there an argument perhaps for ring fencing it to a more limited implementation as opposed to the? I wouldn't actually say that the UK's implementation is necessarily terribly good, but can we ring fence it to an even more limited implementation?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it would be interesting to see what the market says and what other people have got experience with in their own markets.
Did anyone else want to say anything else? Jason?
Yes. So with regards to the UK's case of open banking and its reauthentication of third parties, that was actually required by the European Union's regulatory technical specifications. So they required people to reauthenticate every 3 months with their third parties so that people didn't get an unlimited access to accounts without people knowing about granting access. So they'd be reminded every 3 months that they were still going through a third party, that a third party had access to their account information. So that's why there was a need to re-authenticate in the UK case. It wasn't a technical issue. The UK is currently actually investigating whether to extend that period to, I think, 12 months for re-authentication of third parties.
So could I just add something to that, Jason? It seems to me that all that says is that we need a way for individual schemes to respond to effectively any request, any PISP 3 PPI request, either to say this request needs to be authenticated at the transfer level, at the time the transfer is made, or to say it's possible for this request to rest on an existing relationship of trust that was established via the account linking process.
Yes, I agree.
I was going to have 2 microphones. Yeah, that sounds. Thank you for that context, Jason. I thought it was a technical constraint, but that does make sense. And maybe then there's no issue. I don't know. Cool.
Doesn't sound as though there's an issue, particularly, to be honest.
Now, this is one that essentially I think we could do all in the API.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. I'm very conscious of time. New settlement models. So we have a need for more sophisticated settlement models, support for different business areas, FX, domestic wallets, governments, etc. Automatic allocation of transactions to settlement groups. And again, this is functionality to match that of leading competitors. Can we just maybe, Michael, do you want to speak on this briefly?
I will be happy to do so. As you know, we've talked about this a number of times in the past. We have a worked through proposal, which is reasonably well defined and which I'm happy to share with anyone who would like to see it. And if people would like me to take them through it, that's fine. As you say, there are really two areas here. First is we need to support the ability to settle different kinds of transactions in different ways. So as we come, for instance, to include foreign exchange, as we come to have transfers that are coming in through a cross-network provider from a third party, we will almost certainly want to have different ways of settling those. So this provides us with a good way, not only of defining settlement models, we have that already, but of assigning transfers at the individual transfer level to a settlement model. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is to do with the fact that at present, there is no deterministic assignment of transfers to settlement windows. So the way it works at the moment is the settlement window is closed, and that happens at some point. And every transfer that was completed before that goes into the old settlement window, and everyone after that goes into the new settlement window. Now, that was a source of considerable pain and grief to Mawali, because they had a change of exchange rate at a particular point in the day, and they needed to be absolutely sure that they knew which transfers should be settled at which exchange rate. So this is a real requirement, and I think it's just a matter of general good practice as well. The other thing about it is that it should enable us to greatly reduce the size of what we're now calling settlement batches rather than settlement windows, which will be of use to people who are running systems, because if there is a problem with a transfer, it will typically be in a much smaller batch, and they can just back that out and settle everything else around it. So it's all good stuff, this, and it's reasonably well defined. I think we have a clear idea of what we need to do.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Given that we're so much overrun, I'm just going to move straight on. We only have two more, rest assured. Next is some payment manager extensions. From my perspective, at least, payment manager is very much growing in its importance. It enhanced ease of connection management. It has dashboards. You can query transactions, etc. And as I've already said, it's being extended at the moment to support DFSP specific settlement management and book payment orchestration. And I should have also said 3PPI as well. But I'd highlight that there are significant gaps which could support DFSPs and take some pressure off the hub operators. In particular, well, there's RBAC integration, which I think is happening anyway, but there's also support for DFSP's tech ops teams. So it's been rather focused on operational management, viewing transactions, etc. Now we'd like to actually get DFSP's tech ops teams to be able to see the logs, for example, through Payment Manager. So it's an important element. At the moment, tech ops teams don't actually have access to these reports except via the VPN, which could potentially present a security issue. So we'd rather take that capability away from them and go integrate the whole thing into Payment Manager.
Well, I'm going to put my design authority hat on here and say the most critical part of Payment Manager is the technical debt that needs to be addressed. I think before, I mean, not that it's a zero-sum game, not that we can't do these things as well as fixing the technical debt, but it is a significant amount, at least last time that the design authority looked at it.
Yeah, I would take that. I would take that on board, definitely. So the technical debt needs to be addressed, and I am aware of a significant part of it. Paul,
Yeah, I agree with you, Lewis, but we have made strides since you last looked towards addressing the technical debt. So this is not something that is gone unnoticed and ignored, but there's still a way to go. The way I see it at the moment is we're going to be addressing technical debt as whenever we do work on the solution. So we make sure that there's always CI/CD and unit tests and functional tests that support the functions that are being built into Payment Manager. And that's just a method of managing it. It would be great to be able to just deal with the technical debt directly, but it's hard to justify. So that's the approach we've been taking. And I think we've made a big step in the right direction, but like you said, there's still some technical debt there.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Paul. That's promising.
Isn't that an argument, though, that we should be prioritizing this, if only because of the technical debt? Or am I oversimplifying?
I'm not sure I followed.
It's a seduction ploy, Lewis. Watch out.
Okay, moving on. Last one, and Michael, I want you to discuss this, the Mojo Loop in a box. Otherwise known as, what else did we call it? It's the whole aspect of tech ops, etc., deployments, etc. Sorry, my slides have just been messed around. It was meant to be onboarding, infra, DevOps, Mojo Loop in a box, mini loop, etc. So what's your view on this, Michael? Why should we be addressing this?
Well, I had to deal yesterday with an angry and frustrated innocent Ephraim, whom I'm sorry to see is not here to express his anger and frustration. But as you can imagine, it wasn't an easy moment for me. And what he really wants, and I think it's reasonable for him to want this, not only is it reasonable for him to want it, but I think it would contribute very significantly to the attractiveness of Mojo Loop to adopters and potential adopters, is the ability to set up and configure a Mojo Loop system should be moved as far as possible to the strategists, the administrators, the people who are going to decide how it's going to work. They should be able, as far as it's possible, to change a Mojo Loop system and see how it works, to onboard people of particular kinds and see how that works, all of those kinds of things. So what it's about is, I think, about using technology once to reduce the amount of technology that gets between the people who are deciding how a Mojo Loop scheme would work and the actual operation of that, so the ability to actually see that scheme operating in practice in the real world.
Yeah, and I would agree. And hasn't significant work been done already, for example, around IAC?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, we're much better than we were. But I think Innocent's point was that we were moving at the speed of the technical people and according to their timetable of what they could do. And that his point was, we need to be moving at the speed of the business people and of what they need to do. Now, that's not at all intended, of course, to denigrate the terrific efforts of the number of infrastructure people whom I see glowering in the room. Yeah, glowering, Mr. Brian.
Yeah, Michael, my reply to that is, I have sympathy, but if those business people could step up and decide to commit some resources and time and effort, we'll happily make them happy.
You'll never make the business people happy.
And my answer to that, Warren, is if we, how can I put this? if we did these discussions on the basis that only initiatives that were currently funded by committed resources were worked on and were selected, then we would never have any selections.
Yeah, and there is a very strong argument, since ultimately we are actually selling this to business people in the end. They want to, the very first thing that they want to see is, okay, show me it's up and running. I want to push a button and deploy, and then see some transactions.
Can I interject here at some stage?
Yeah. Please.
I guess I really loved what David did yesterday with the stratification of the layers. So I think that's the first thing to do, is decide at which place you want to pitch which, right? I don't think taking Miniloop and trying to actually run a business on it is a great idea. On the other hand, I noticed some of the IAC stuff, and I know Terraform and stuff like that, and it's very comprehensive. But it's not something that you're going to sit down and test in an afternoon, right? And I don't even know how much it would cost to test that configuration. In fact, that's one of the things I want to get together with David today. We started conversations, we keep getting interrupted. But I have a burning question on this topic, which I think will help guide us. Paul, could you just look at the P18 Slack channel? I just sent a diagram. And what I really want to see people to think about is managed versus non-managed. And I'd love just to get a discussion on this, because I think that will, as well as David's list, I think it will help us frame how you want to head, or at least what components should be in what part of that list. And my burning question is, who wants to manage the control plane? Do we want to do that in sandboxes? Do we want to pay the extra cost? Or do we want to take real advantage of what the work that Microsoft is doing, because they're doing managed control plane, and I think they're doing a roadshow. So one of the things I'd love right up front, along with David's stratification list, is where we want to use managed and where we want to pay the extra cost in complexity, security, operations of doing non-managed Kubernetes. That's a burning question. Does it make sense? And I don't know if you've got a sec just to pull up the diagram, David, so also it makes sense.
Do you want to put it on the screen? I can do that.
Would you mind?
Yeah.
Just so we can all be on the same page, and hopefully my question will make good sense.
Can you see that?
So yeah, so on the left-hand side is for a managed service, say what they're doing on Azure, all of the Kubernetes control plane, all of that install is a managed service. It's secured. The database is secured. It's scaled out. And often, say for Azure, there is a zero cost for actually having that control plane. Quite often because they run Kubernetes control plane in Kubernetes, in containers. On the right-hand side, you can see the dark boxes up the top. They're the parts that we're actually managing and paying to manage. And that's that's sort of in the IAC right now. And I just think, and there's, you know what, you can use all the IAC to do the left-hand side as well. In fact, I think it simplifies things. And I just think we should start at that discussion about where you want to do which, where you want to do Miniloop and have install.sh, where you want to do the sandbox and what needs to be in the sandbox. That might be the contested space. And then at what level do you actually want to put our customers in light of the work that Microsoft is doing, which is managed? And I hope that makes sense. I'll shut up now.
Sure. Which just emphasizes the amount of work needed on this particular item, this workstream item. Michael?
Sorry, I'm just, Dave, Professor Fry is about to enter the discussion.
So I like the approach that you're taking to clearly delineate control plane from non-control plane costs and effort. What I didn't hear yesterday was an actual estimate of how much Azure's solution would cost to run. So I'm wondering, number one, if we're thinking about going down this route, we have to have numbers in front of us to say, even though you don't have the, say, the security implications, the maintenance implications of running your own cluster, which I tend to think are minimal because I've been running them so much. I have personal experience in the space. I don't think it's that onerous, to be honest. Security, we're talking about sandboxes here, so we have to be honest about what is the risk that we're potentially going to see to our platforms in a security perspective, right? So we have to put context around what the risks are from a security perspective, and we have to see numbers about the cost estimates to run the platform in order to make a valid choice. And then the third thing is that we're trying to not go down a vendor lock-in perspective, right? So there are Azure-only solutions that are being used, which are naturally going to drive the community towards using those as opposed to looking at non-vendor specific solutions in various spaces, whether it's API gateways or other tooling. I'm just picking that one as one example. So anyway, I think it's a good discussion to have, but we don't have, in my opinion, we don't have enough information to make those kind of decisions. And it didn't sound like that the Azure team is going to have cost estimates for quite some time. No. I'm not talking about the control plane. I'm talking about the whole solution, because obviously they're wrapping their cost of managing the control plane in the overall cost of the solution.
Guys, no, I understand.
It's not a free solution.
Guys, I want to go back to what Warren said, and I want, of course, as usual, to apologize for Warren for having been a bit of a smart ass in my response to him. The point Warren was making, I think, is that the success of all of these initiatives depends on the people who are going to be defining the schemes and deciding how they work, saying what they need to be able to do and how they need to be able to do it. And unless we get that, people like Tom and David can't respond correctly, can't respond efficiently, because they don't know what they have to do. So that, in my mind, is one of the key asks for this, is to say people need to get engaged. The problem is, this is a room full of technical people, apart from me. And therefore, it looks to them as if the technical stuff is the hard stuff to do about implementing a motor loop scheme. It's not. The hard stuff is figuring out how it's going to work, getting the participants and the potential participants to understand what's going to be required of them, how they're going to have to work, deciding with the regulator what needs to be done, all of that kind of stuff. And that's a process of negotiation which is currently completely unsupported by any of the tools that we have, at least as far as I can see. Now, if we can give people better tools in that area, if they find it easier to set up a modular loop scheme because it's easy for them to define how they want it to work and then see it working, then that's going to be a major plus for us, I think.
Okay, we have 2 minutes to finish this discussion. So please, let's wrap it up.
I think the starting point, David and I can argue a bit more, and I'm not trying to do anything apart from bring the details of the conversation so that somebody, certainly not me, can make a decision about which way we want to go, right? But I do think that David's list yesterday let's get the 2 or 3 layers of the 2 or 3 levels of things. Maybe we'll argue a little bit about the middle one, which is the sandbox, right? But let's get that just in a document somewhere in Stratified or in a channel ad so that we can agree, because I thought that was a really good structure. I thought that was really, that clarified so much of my thinking yesterday, David, when you put that up. I thought that was great. And that's the hook, I think, to have the conversation around.
And to follow on from that, Tom, I think to meet Michael's point, we should be saying, and for somebody wanting to see a demonstration, and there's actually been quite a few conversations around that space earlier on this week, people saying, okay, so show me, give me something to show. I mean, we should just outline, okay, the different things, and for a potential hub operator, do this, and this to get you to this point where you can see stuff. And then you're gonna have to talk to us because we haven't documented everything and we don't,
I just want to second what Michael was saying of, yes, that everyone has been asking for a long time for this, that thing that allows us to show and deploy very quickly. And I think that is a separate thing. And I would love to see us be able to define what we need in terms of that show me thing. And I'd love for us to be able to deploy that show me thing on 3 different vendors. But I also want to say this conversation, this underlying conversation around infrastructure, I don't want to lose it. So I think they're related, but I want to make sure that even if we don't choose to talk about what Tom is talking about, or choose that it's a thing we're going to do, I want to make sure that that conversation's happening in the background before the next convening.
Sure. And as I said, I think the edges of that are easy. Out of the box, I think is, maybe I'll keep Mini-Loop. I was just going to get rid of it and have installed it at Shell, but over drinks last night, it sounded a bit popular. But at the end of the deployment, well, that's obviously IAC. What's in the middle, I think, is the squishy bit, which is the sandbox stuff, and that's where we can probably have some good and useful technical discussions. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, everyone. Can we bring that to a halt now, please? We are definitely way over time, and we need to stop now.